fights, but unfortunately, most people really do fight dirty. It might feel good in the moment, but actually it prevents you from getting what you really want in your relationship. I'm Dr. Christy Wise, and this is Life Sauce. So today we're talking, Jacob, about dirty fighting, but I think we should kind of start this conversation out with what's healthy fighting, healthy conflict. You know, some people will think that all fighting is bad. As a matter of fact, they don't even like the word fighting. So we're going to use conflict to make it more comfortable for those who are adverse to the word, right?
Sounds
but
good.
It could be really powerful because when there's healthy conflict, the idea is that it furthers things in the relationship.
So what are like the key parts of healthy conflict?
Well, I think that the key parts are that both people are vulnerable enough to even discuss that they disagree or that they're hurt by something, right? Because that alone is difficult for people.
So it sounds like honesty is a big one.
Honesty, and I think approaching it with minimal defensiveness, and also approaching it with coming from a place of love, not assuming that your partner is intentionally trying to fuck with you or hurt you or, you know what I mean, destroy the relationship, but that we're trying to resolve something together or understand something better about each other.
Us versus the problem, not us versus each other sort of thing?
Yes, absolutely.
And so on the opposite side of the spectrum, there's dirty fighting.
Yeah.
What are the characteristics of dirty fighting?
Well, dirty fighting, and we can go through all of them, but dirty fighting, in essence, in my mind, is meant to shut our partner down and give us the false sense that we're winning something, right? I mean, I hear myself say to my couples all the time, there's not going to be a ribbon at the door when you leave. Like, there is no ribbon. You don't get an award for winning this fight. And even though it feels like there's some satisfaction in those few seconds, it is like cancer to a relationship.
And are these fighting habits just something that's sort of baked into who we are? Do we learn it from watching relationships when we're growing up? Where do these techniques come from?
Yeah, so that kind of brings the question of, you know, is it nurture versus nature, you know, and I think that there's both, you know, like I'm half Italian, and I say then on the Italian side, they're very expressive and they're loud and they're emotive and they're passionate, both in anger, passionate in love, passionate in food. So some of it can be, you know, nature, but nurture, I would say, is one of the biggest parts of how we learn to fight. We watch our parents fight, we watch how we are dealt with as children when we're fighting with other people. And so I think a lot of what we do when we're fighting with our partner is unconscious. The other part, there are schools of thought that say when we fight, when we're elevated and we escalate, we are brought to a place in our own lives where there are wounds. So for instance, I'll hear couples say, oh my God, when he fights, he's like a 9-year-old. It's like fighting with a teenager. Well, I would guess that there might be some wounds at that age and stage of development. And so oftentimes when we are in fight or flight, we do kind of resort to those wounds, to those triggers and stuff like that.
And so I guess that kind of brings us into the different types of dirty fighting. Because if someone is fighting like a 9-year-old, then they might resort to, you know, maybe I'm not talking to you anymore, or bothering someone to the point of like just not leaving them alone.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good spot to talk about our first type of dirty fighting, which is silent treatment.
Yes, silent treatment. This is the old school stonewalling kind of thing that, you know, arms crossed and I've got nothing to say. And the problem with this is that it's used as a way to avoid conflict. Like, I'm just not even going to talk about it. I'm not getting into it. And while it definitely doesn't do that, it actually prolongs things, because now we're just bubbling underneath the surface of what then is coming next. And it also sends a signal to our partner that you are not important enough for me to engage in this conversation with you. That's how little I value you.
So there's like a dual purpose with the cold shoulder. Not only is it letting things fester and get worse without dealing with it, it's also sending another negative message where it's like, you're not even worth addressing.
Yes, you're not even worth the breath that's going to come out of my mouth right now. And like I said, a lot of people, because people don't love conflict, of course, so they'll leave this silent treatment to hope and re-engage with each other later, but then they'll have one other argument that could be something small, and it just blows the fuck up.
So what can be done for, let's say there's a relationship where one partner tends to stonewall pretty frequently and the other one wants to deal with the conflict, at the moment where it happens.
Yeah. So normally what I do is I would ask the quiet partner, the stonewaller, to say, is it that you need a timeout? Is it that you're too angry to be able to communicate what you're feeling? If that's the case, then let's decide ahead how long we are going to do. This is how we fight. If one of us is elevated past a 7 or 11, and I use numbers because I like people to fight between a 4 and a 6. Do you know what I mean by that? Mm-hmm. So if you are so elevated that you can't hear and that you can't communicate effectively and you need a timeout, let's agree ahead of time that timeout is no longer than 20 minutes, or that we sleep on it, or whatever it is as a couple you guys decide. That then allows the other partner to say, I'm not being rejected, I'm not being abandoned, my partner is feeling overwhelmed or flooded by emotion, I'm going to give you a timeout, and then we're going to come together and we're going to talk about it.
So delaying the actual getting into the nitty-gritty of whatever causing that argument isn't the problem. It's one person not willing to engage with their partner. So if the team decides together they want to sleep on it, give it, eat some food first, something like that, then that's okay.
Yes. Yeah. Then it's like, okay, then you're using it really as a cooling off instead of a avoidance, a stonewalling, the silent treatment.
And then in a situation where both people tend to stonewall, what's going to happen there?
Well, that's boy, I tell you, that's what I meant about it being like cancer. And that is common, by the way. It's like, you're not talking to me, I'm doubly not going to talk to you. And how long are we going to go? And, in the beginning, it can go, a couple hours, and that's painful. And then as the relationship moves into time and space, then they go a day or 2 or 3 days or a week. I've had couples who have literally not talked to each other for a good month, right? Because it's like, well, I'm going to top that. And they become desensitized to what that, ouch, we're not connected feeling is. So it's very dangerous. What?
So it kind of becomes a new baseline.
Oh, it does. And it changes. And you can imagine after 30 years of marriage what that looks like.
And then I guess there's another situation where one partner might feel like they're stonewalling, but that's not the other partner's intention. Like, I think specifically if we're talking about like texting or something, if one person's reaching out like, hey, we should talk about this, we should talk about this. What if the other person's just, at work? The first person might not be fully ready to receive the, hey, this isn't a part of the argument, I'm just busy right now.
Yeah.
So what about like a false positive on a stonewalling test?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And it's good that you brought up texting, because that's certainly how a lot of this plays out later on. So I think that if things feel fragile, again, couples have to decide how they're going to argue with one another. Like, how is it that we do this? Not when they're upset, because when you're upset, then everybody's wrong. But ahead of time, if I'm texting you and you're at work and you're not answering, it'd be easy for me to be like, I know he could pick up his phone because he picks it up for fantasy football, like all of that stuff. But it might be like a follow-up, like, are you not talking to me because you're angry, or are you busy? That allows you to say, no, we can talk about this later, I'm busy at work right now.
So some clarification.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what would an unhealthy version of that be? I guess we kind of touched on it for a moment, where it's I know he could pick up because of fantasy football, but in the event that you're the person who's at work and sees that text, where it's like, I know that you could pick up your phone, and how do you sort of dig yourself out of that hole that you're kind of already in?
Yeah. I think it comes with an apology. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not responding well. I'm just hurt. So maybe we should talk about this in person when I get home. You know, the problem with also with texting is if you just say enough, hey, sorry, didn't mean to ignore you, but the intent is not there to clean it up, then there could be like a superficial resolution, you know, where it feels like we resolved it because you said okay instead of okay. You said okay, you know. We're not looking for a superficial resolution.
So I guess that also brings up the point of like, texting language is very different than spoken language. I guess making an extra effort to write like you would talk might be helpful. Do you think
Yes.
that could be part of it?
Oh, I think that's great. Because you and I both know that if you said to your girlfriend, I'm going to meet you for dinner at so-and-so restaurant, and she says K, then you hear K. But if you say something and you're upset and she says K, then it's a whole different communication.
Definitely different. And I guess that sort of talks or leads into like misinterpretation. You know, the difference between okay, K, or even like two Ks in a row. For some reason, that second K makes it a lot softer and friendlier. So is that something that just needs to be changed in general for texting in a relationship? Or is it specifically around when things are kind of sensitive or raw from an argument?
Yeah, I think it's when things are sensitive and raw and fragile. Like, you know, treating it with care is really, one, it shows your love and your intention is to treat it with care and love and respect. You know, when we don't, that sends the opposite message, that I'm not even worth you being gentle about this topic, or you know what I mean? And that kind of makes me, I want to kind of jump into the next one, which is chasing, right? Because this is the other one, you know, where we will text paragraphs and paragraphs about why we're hurt and what they did and what that reminds me of and why we're triggered and you know, or the idea of following someone around the house going, you're not going to walk away from this argument. We're not. And chasing can completely overwhelm, overburden, especially somebody who's conflict adverse.
Yeah, I think the smothering is definitely, all the things we're talking about are pretty bad, but I feel like the smothering is one of the more aggressive and overwhelming types of dirty fighting we're going to talk about, because it doesn't give the partner an opportunity to really, you know, say like, this is what's happening, I was working, that's why I wasn't responding, like with stonewalling, or hey, can you pause for a moment, this is how I feel. It's sort of just like a barrage of emotions.
It's a barrage, and for the person who feels overloaded and they feel themselves withdrawing, it could feel almost abusive. It made me, for some reason, think about your UFC fighting? What is that? UFC fighting, right?
Yeah.
And how they do all this crazy shit to each other. And I feel overwhelmed watching them be pummeled and pummeled. But there is a code that says when I tap, everybody stops. Like there's a boundary.
Very true. I didn't think of anything like that.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tapping means you're done.
Yeah. And that's it.
Yeah.
Everyone says, no, we're going to respect the rule. It's not like you tapped, but you didn't tap hard enough. You didn't ask enough. You know what I mean?
Depending on the situation, sometimes
Yeah.
someone might not feel a tap, but yeah, that's a pretty solid analogy, especially because, you know, not to make any puns, but there are literally rules to stop them from fighting dirty, you know, using their techniques where, I don't know, maybe an eye poke is equivalent to a chasing, because you're not letting them really like be able to fight back or defend themselves.
Right.
But I guess this kind of brings up the point of walking that fine line between, you know, communication seems to be the solution for most problems in a relationship. But now we're at a point where we're talking about almost over.
One is like kind of like bids, you know, when people will only make a certain amount of bids for somebody. And if they're continuously rejected, they stop. You know, people say it all the time. I ask for sex all the time. I got turned down. I got tired asking. I'm not going to ask anymore. You know, I kept asking for forgiveness. She kept rolling her eyes. You know, this is that same thing. When you're telling somebody that you're going to leave, they will only live in fear for so long before they help pack your bags.
So is a threat of abandonment something that is avoided at all costs under every circumstance, or is there a place for it?
Well, if it's truly, truly deeply something that will cause you to leave the relationship, like serious, you're calling me names, you're abusing me in some way, it would be appropriate and justified to say, I am never going to put up with something like that. It is the thing that's going to cause me to leave you.
So it should be used, but only in the most dire of scenarios when the relationship is already in a spot where it could go either way.
Yes. Yeah. And you better mean it.
Mhm.
Right? Because then it's not going to further anything.
And we've talked a little bit about how to stop certain techniques, but are there any general tips to stopping dirty fighting as a whole?
Well, first of all, I would say that these conversations, the conversations about conflict and fighting, they need to be had when there's not already an upset. And people hate talking about it because it's like, why would you talk about it when things feel good? You know what I mean? It's like it's a difficult one, but it's just as important as conversations of how many babies do you want, and do you see us getting married, and like all the other difficult conversations. You know, do we have rules and parameters around the way we argue? And we should talk about that. Do you know what I mean? Maybe after a fight, when things feel calm, if you want to talk about what went right and what went wrong and what you can modify the next time, that would be appropriate also, right? But not in the middle of the fight.
So rules need to be set for fighting. Those rules should be set and talked about in a time where it's not during the fight where emotions are high.
Yeah.
Even though it might be kind of weird to talk about what some people would consider the worst part of a relationship during, good parts of the relationship
Yeah.
when things are happy.
Yeah.
And then when there are instances of dirty fighting, is it okay to bring those up outside of, hey, last time we had a fight, you kind of did this and that hurt really badly? Or is that going to be a form of piling on?
No, I think if you feel it going there, it would be okay to say, do you know, I want to remind you how much that hurt me last time, and I feel like we're going down that path. Do we need to take a time out right now? Like, let's get some perspective. Because once it starts to go down that path, then it's like, okay, like let's give each other the opportunity to get some perspective and pull it back together here. Like let's set us up to succeed even when we're hurt and when we're upset.
So taking a small break is imperative, but not leaving it so long to the point where emotions start to fester and grow.
That's right. And the next one I would say is be willing to apologize quickly. Like, and people are like, what am I saying sorry for? I didn't do anything wrong. No, I could just apologize that you're upset, or I could apologize that we're in this right now. I'm so sorry that we're experiencing this right now. You know what I mean? But being willing to put your neck out there and soften and apologize.
Separating being able to feel empathy and being able to feel sorry that you're in a bad situation and not feeling like it's an admission of guilt.
That's right. And that means then we have to kind of decrease or lower some of those defenses. Because, if you can picture all those defenses up, it's, well, I'm not going to apologize. But when our defenses are down, it's kind of like, I love you. I would never want to intentionally hurt you, and if I have, my God, I'm sorry. But let's talk about that.
Not fighting for a win, but fighting to make things better.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does take pulling back a little bit, you know what I mean? Like softening up.
Yeah, I think that's probably just about it for dirty fighting. Any last thoughts?
No, I think that if you find that you can't get out of the loop of the dirty fighting, there's a good chance that you're fighting dirty, right? Like when people are like, we just go round and round and round. If you find that you guys are exhausted, you're going until you get exhausted, then get some help, get a mediator, get somebody in there with you, because it means that, we can't see what we can't see. And there's a good chance that the way that you guys are going about the discussion or the argument is ineffective. And that's why you're going round and round and round.
Introspection is helpful, but can only go so far.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. I think that could be it for today then.
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome.
For more information or to submit a question, go to our website, lifesauce.com. That's life-sauce.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media. Thanks for joining us.